Welcome to This Explainer. Right out of the gate, we're diving into a truly fascinating and, honestly, pretty dark mythic narrative straight from our source material. We're talking about a grim, dark Gothic fable here. It takes complex Nietzschean philosophy and transforms it into this epic, high-stakes tale of spiritual survival. We're going to look at exactly how existential despair gets weaponized, and more importantly, how you can actually find meaning when the universe itself seems to argue against it. To set the stage, think about this specific imagery from the text. In the gray twilight of the fallen cosmos, right away you're immersed in a fundamentally broken universe. And this realm, it's orchestrated by what the source calls the architects of the abyss. These guys aren't your typical monsters with pitchforks. They are spectral tyrants. And their ultimate goal isn't to destroy our physical body. No, they want to completely break the human will. Act 1. The Fallen Cosmos. Let's look at exactly how these antagonists operate. The really crucial point here is that these architects of the abyss are actually fallen seraphs. They've entirely traded away their own transcendent purpose. And because they've lost that meaning, they've engineered this deliberate methodology of erosion, the goal, to inflict their exact same state of aimlessness onto humanity. They essentially want to crush the human will under the agonizing weight of a meaningless eternity. The source has a great name for this weapon. It's called spiritual fatigue. Now, you have to understand the difference here between physical destruction and spiritual fatigue. Physical destruction, tangible rot, the cessation of bodily function, the ending of a life, that's finite. It ends. But spiritual fatigue is so much worse. It's a deliberate spiritual erosion. It doesn't just end a life, it erodes the soul. It forces this paralyzing realization that existence itself is just a cyclical repetition of vanity. Physical rot stops your heart, sure, but spiritual fatigue tries to convince you that your suffering is eternal, groundless, and completely without purpose. Act 2. The Mathematical Prison. This is where we see how the architects actually build the environment they use to trap the soul. Okay, so to enforce the spiritual fatigue, the architects don't use magic. They literally weaponize the laws of physics. They point to the equation E equals mc squared, framing it as the sovereign law of what they call the clockwork vault. In this framework, they use the logic of the closed system to argue that the universe is strictly bound by finite energy and matter. Therefore, they argue, it completely lacks any transcendent purpose or divine judge. They take the infinite, boundless nature of the human soul and turn it into a crushing, inescapable mathematical burden. This brings us to the core of their mockery, the 5 parables of the negated cross. In the first one, the parable of the geometric scaffold, they transform the ultimate symbol of hope into a bleak marker of entrapment. They mock the cross not as a bridge to the divine, but merely as a coordinate of horizontal stasis inside this mathematical prison. They essentially declare that in a closed universe, any cry for redemption doesn't reach heaven. It just echoes and is lost to the void of a closed system. Then we hit their second argument, the parable of the failed superiority. Standing before what the text calls the broken mirror cross, these spectral tyrants apply our really dark Nietzschean lens. They mock Christ not as a savior, but as a failed Übermensch, a failed superior man who succumbed to the spirit of gravity. They whisper that the sacrifice was the ultimate absurdity, a lie that offers absolutely zero redemption. To them, it just leaves humanity to wallow in the despair of its own relentless, groundless suffering. Act 3. The Illusion of Meaning. Now we're descending into the absolute rock bottom of this narrative's despair. So, the third parable, the parable of the illusionary victory, argues that resurrection itself is a total falsehood. The demons claim it's just a numbing illusion of peace, a deceptive reflection caught in the last man's mirror. The architects insist this illusion was designed for one thing, to hide the paralyzing realization of futility. They argue that this false promise of victory mocks the fierce instinct for evolution, enticing the weary to trade the agonizing path of self-overcoming for perfect, deadening apathy. Which leads right into the fourth parable, featuring a really unsettling figure called the ugliest man of the metaphysical realm. He performs what's described as a kenosis turned inside out. Now, kenosis normally means self-emptying out of love, right? But here it's completely twisted. He empties the cross of all its meaning, creating this crushing, hollow void. He mocks sacrificial love, stripping away every ounce of divine triumph and leaving nothing but emptiness. So, instead of a story of redemption, the architects present this bleak metabolic record of decline and resentiment. They argue that human effort is nothing but a cyclical repetition of vanity. It's a groundless loop of suffering where the soul remains forever trapped in a mathematical cage. It is the ultimate Nietzschean nightmare, the eternal reoccurrence of all meaninglessness, just playing out on a loop forever. Okay, let's take a breath. We've seen the architecture of the abyss, right? We've seen the spiritual fatigue, the mathematical cage, the negated cross. But does this story actually have to end in this suffocating, closed mathematical loop? Must the soul simply succumb to the math of the abyss?
Act 4, the Transcendent Philology. Thankfully, this is where we hit our climax, shifting away from demonic erosion and into a powerful philosophical rebellion.
Enter the fifth and final parable, the parable of the wanderer's resistance. Here, a character known as the weary theologian watches a wanderer who stands directly in front of all this demonic mockery. And in the face of this calculated spiritual fatigue, the wanderer stands firm. He looks at the easy, apathetic nihilism being offered to him, what the text brilliantly calls the poodle form of nihilism, and he just outright rejects it. He flat out refuses the paralyzing realization that the sacrifice was in vain. So how does he do it? How do you find meaning in a closed loop? First, he practices what the source calls a transcendent philology, a deep spiritual reading and love of the word and of meaning itself. Second, by doing that, he manages to find actual weight in the vanity. And finally, through this sheer force of interpretation, he discovers the divine judge hidden right there, deep within the heart of that very same closed mathematical cage. Which brings us to this incredible final quote from the Wanderer. The abyss is not a pit you fall into. It is a philosophy you accept. I want to leave you with this really provocative thought to take away from this explainer today. Meaninglessness, no matter how mathematically certain or spiritually exhausting it might seem, is not some inescapable physical law. It's a choice, and like the Wanderer, it's a choice that you can stubbornly and beautifully refuse.